Welcome back to What's New with Mead. We're in episode number 61, and I have a super fun guest, someone who has a much larger YouTube channel than me, who's much more educated in the world of distilling than I will ever be. I have Jesse from Still It here to talk about his experience with brewing, distilling, and just get to know him. I mean, he's been a person in my life I've seen for years and years, and I'm super glad to sit down, even though we're halfway across the world from each other, and talk to you, Jesse. It's just fun.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
I'm not going to lie. I had a little bit of my brain could not figure out how to schedule this Zoom call with the time difference. I felt like I had to pull out a calculator and start doing math and not that math meme where it's all over the place to figure out how, what time it was where you are. Because right now, this is Monday for me. It's a Tuesday for you. And that just blows my mind. So...
Yeah, dude, I've gotten somewhat used to it now because most things like this I do, are not New Zealand.
Yeah.
But my go-to is always kind of work it out and then ask for a calendar invite so Google can check my time math.
Yeah.
Because I've screwed up a few times and been waiting for someone that I told to be there at a different time or vice versa.
Well, I feel that though. I definitely was I was checking my watch and I did the same thing. I was like, is this right? But here we are to chat about,
made it.
brewing and stuff. So I would love to get to know you a little better. We kind of mentioned at the beginning of this, we've both been doing the YouTube thing for 6 years, but how long ago did you start brewing, home brewing, distilling, all that?
My first taste of home brewing was a long time ago. Probably about 15, 16 years ago. My wife Erin and I were managing a backpackers down in the South Island in our traveling days. And the manager before us used to brew just kit and kilo beer in the shed. And he basically told me that part of my job was to keep that alive and keep growing. So I got a little taste of it. That was just real down and dirty. Go down to the homebrew store, buy whatever kit, follow the instructions on the packet, throw it in the shed, and it would probably be a frost overnight. And, it was like a little tin garden shed. It made booze. It was kind of terrible.
I'm sorry. I'm starting recording. I did not start the Zoom recording too, though. So, anyways, now we got video. That was all audio before, but continue. Sorry about that.
Do you want to start again?
No, we can. It'll be fine. It'll be fun. Totally
okay, cool. That was my first taste, and then probably like a solid 5 or 6 year break from that. My wife and I, we ended up just kind of traveling for about 10 years, and when we finally settled down. As students, 10 years after everyone else did, we finally had our own little place, and I decided to get into home brewing. And one of my school buddies ended up being a professional brewer. At that time, I don't think he was winning all the national homebrew competitions and stuff. I don't think he'd actually started the brewery. And he heard that I was doing it. He reached out to me and basically said, "Look, mate, no friend of mine is going to make bad beer.
I can't let you do this."
He got in the car, he drove for 3 hours to where we were, stayed the night, and just gave me an intensive crash course in all grain brewing for 48 hours, which was awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And that kind of kicked it all off for me, dude. I brewed for probably 3 or 4 years after that. Almost exclusively beer. I think I messed around a little bit with adding honey and fruit into random beers. And then when I started the channel, I jumped over to distilling, and now I don't really have time for fermenting almost anything else.
Yeah. Well, that's fair though, because I mean, and we'll talk about it some as we go further, but I'm sure commercial side, everybody thinks if a commercial meadery, winery, brewery, distilling, all that, you're going to have a little bit of time to still do that fun stuff. However, I think that you're probably a pretty busy guy when it comes to just keeping that running. But so you're saying you started distilling how much time before you started your YouTube channel did you start distilling in general?
Not at all. I started
Oh,
distilling after I started the YouTube channel. So I started the YouTube channel, and then I think maybe about the 15th video, I actually distilled like my first drop.
okay.
So for a long time there, it was kind of like it wasn't. I know everything, and I'm going to teach people. That was ridiculous. I still don't feel like that at all now. It was more. This is something I want to do. I knew I wanted to start a YouTube channel. I realized that it's completely legal for me to home distill in New Zealand, and that's a giant competitive advantage over any other YouTuber,
Yeah.
unless they happen to be in New Zealand.
Yes.
So I picked distilling and just started documenting sort of the stuff that I was learning as I learned it.
That's cool.
And then, yeah.
So,
So
what was your first like distilling project? I know it's been a long time.
It's been a real long time, dude. It was a vodka, I believe. I don't remember what recipe it was. That's kind of crazy. It's so weird. I'm sure you're used to this as well. Like quite often, you'll make something, especially if you're going to age it for a while, and it's your whole world for that 3 weeks, 6 weeks, however long it takes to produce it, right? And your mind's like, oh, I'll remember that forever. How could I ever forget this? And then time marches on and it just fades away.
Yeah, I feel that. Especially when you've done, I'm sure you have maybe hundreds at this point of things under your belt. And so you kind of just like push those things to the side because you might have made something better than that, And I at least start to categorize like, well, I've done a whatever mango mead before and I did it forever ago, but I did a better one and I start to push that other one down. It's not that I don't
Totally
want to ever own it. It's just like, well, I've done it better. So I'm going to remember that recipe over this one.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and things just they're constantly evolving, and I guess the ingredient or the technique or the theory of what it is that you're making is really prominent in your head because it's something that you just found out and you're excited about, or something you don't really understand, so you're kind of wrestling with it and testing it. And then 3 or 4 years later, that concept is a given in your head. So the reason you made the recipe in the first place is totally changed as well.
Yeah.
And tastes change too, like your preference and what you want to drink. Or, I mean, the classic thing happened to me when I was doing beer. You start making beer and you're like, oh my God, there's these things called hops. And suddenly everything that almost every home brewer ever does is just cram as much hops as you possibly can into something. And then one day you wake up and think, you know what? A 4% English ale would be real nice.
I want to have 3 of these, not just one.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So how much of like your beer brewing side translated into the distilling, would you say?
It helped and it hurted. It hurt. Hurted. The advantage to it was I understood mashing and fermentation. Like I understood how to manipulate that. For a lot of people that get into distilling, the idea of doing an all grain mash just feels like alchemy, and they don't know what parts of that process. I don't quite know how to explain it, but you have if you look at an all grain recipe, there's 20 lines on the recipe,
right?
And it's just kind of this mystical thing of, well, it was supposed to be 65 degrees, but mine was 65.3. Is that an issue? I don't know. And then there's just all of these things that you just don't quite understand, or you'll run into something like using an unmalted grain, and then you just throw it in there and not understand that you need to gelatinize that first. So all of that was really good. I understood that. I understood the fermenting. The thing that I didn't realize was a lot of the things that are different to beer, and it kind of, I had this bias in terms of being super clean and sterile, in terms of fermenting cooler and steady. Yeah, those are probably the 2 main ones. And it just took me a while to to get out of that
Yeah.
and realize that it's fine to, you know, a uncovered ferment isn't
Yeah.
a big deal, you know?
Yeah. It's
And in some
true.
ways that actually makes it more delicious at the end.
Yeah. There's definitely like you mentioned the mash side being kind of sciencey, and that is something I'm going through right now. You mentioned that it's like I'm trying to do more beer, and I'm familiar.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you name a honey, I can tell you about it. I can tell you every fruit I've ever used. Like that is not the scary part. But the moment I start
Right.
throwing in grains, and then somebody's like, "Did you mash at 149 or 151 Fahrenheit?" I'm like, 149. They're like, "Oh, me should have done 151. Here's why." I'm like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, so it's like the minor things do make a huge difference, and I'm still learning that. I think it's fun that transferred over for distilling, because obviously that still happens, and I don't know. Not everybody's familiar with the distilling process. So, did you feel like you had some beer mentors? A beer mentor. Did you have a distilling mentor, or was it a friend? Was it
Yeah,
YouTube, or was it?
no, it was all forums. There's the Home Distiller forum, which was good, and there's not really any more, like a New Zealand forum as well, and there was probably I'd say maybe 4 or 5 guys that kind of took me under their wing, because I jumped on all those forums and I started learning, and then I got to the point where I was like, oh, I'm actually going to do this, and I started saying, look, I'm starting a YouTube channel. I want to really understand this stuff. I'm going to ask dumb questions, or I'll ask the same question 5 different ways. Just try and bear with me. Like, I'm trying to do something that'll help people learn in the future, you know. And a lot of people didn't get it at all. They're like, this is stupid. Why would you do this? YouTube sucks. Forums are better. A lot of people were like, oh, you're just going to steal all the knowledge. Not a lot of people. Some people. They're like, you're going to steal all the knowledge out of the forums, and then you're going to make money out of it. But there was a core group of people, most of which I'm still in touch with, who really took me under their wing, and led me through that first part. And I think distilling is uniquely tricky to start. The learning curve at the beginning of distilling is so high, because you have to understand everything that you need to know for beer for the most part. Everything you'd need to know for something like mead as well. So especially some of the things that'll come up more with nutrients and fermenting to a higher ABV. You need to understand all of that, and you haven't even started the thing that the name is. You haven't distilled yet, and then you need to do all of that.
Yeah.
And then you finish distilling, and you're like, great, my job's done. No. There's this thing called maturation. They're like, cool, now I've got it all sorted. No, now there's blending. So it's almost like 3 or 4 hobbies rolled into one, and you can't really start until you at least have a base understanding of all of it.
Yeah.
Because like, if you don't understand how you're going to distill and the techniques you're going to have to use to make the product you want to make, you probably just bought the wrong still.
Oh, yeah.
When you started, do you know what I mean? Like, so if you want to make gin and then you go out and buy a pot still, that's awesome. But you need to make vodka first.
Yeah.
Or, you really want to make whiskey, but you bought a Reflux still that's kind of harder to run as a pot still. So there's this weird thing where you just need to know so much information to even get into it. So I'll be eternally grateful to that core group of people that really helped me out for sure.
Yeah.
Man.
So you said you started your channel, you got like 12, 15 videos in. Were you called at that point Still It, or did you have a different name?
Yeah, so to take a little step back, I had a long hobby of, like I said, I traveled for a long time, and I had a long history of picking up random hobbies, putting way too much time into them. And then waking up one day and realizing, this is dumb. I don't like this anymore. And I haven't, I got some entertainment out of it.
Right.
But that was it. And I was at a point where I was working a job that used to be cool. The job was then crap. And I kind of thought, I want another hobby. but I want to do something that if it works, something will come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it'll be good on my resume. It'll turn into a side hustle, whatever. And that's why I decided to go with YouTube. I loved
Yeah.
YouTube. Everything I'd ever enjoyed doing, I learned what I could do from YouTube. So it was very much how do I put it? It was a hobby for me, but at the same time, I treated it as a business from the very beginning. So before I made my first video, I'd like probably done 80, 90 hours worth of real solid research on
Wow.
all the channels that I thought were cool. That's how I met the Whiskey Tribe guys.
Yeah.
I'd written like a business plan. I'd done a bunch of work on branding.
Yeah.
I think I had like 12 different iterations of logos and catchphrases and
Yeah.
all that.
So
sort
you
of
always
stuff.
knew you were going to
so
distill then.
as soon as I decided I was, I did some of that work for 3 different channels. So I had 3 different channels with semi-business plans written and names, and I can't even remember what the one was called Make Anything, I think was what I was going to call it. And the idea was, because I kept picking up these random hobbies and then ditching them, I was like, I'll just do that for a job. I'll pick up a new hobby and learn it until I'm bored of it, make videos about it, and move on to the next one, you know?
Yeah.
So I did take it pretty seriously from the get-go. So most of what you see on the channel has been relatively consistent.
Yeah.
The one big difference is that, so I started the channel as Still It, and then I think it was probably about 2 or 3 years ago, I kind of reordered the branding. So Still It is still the channel, but Chase the Craft is the business that owns the channel.
Okay. Yeah.
So like our products, our website, that sort of stuff is all branded as Chase the Craft, and Still It fits under that.
That's cool. Well, so I thought that was funny. You know, for me, I feel like like Mead, I knew I was going to make Mead. So you're like talking about beginning of I'm making beer under the Still It category, and then suddenly switching over to distilling. It makes sense, but I just didn't know if you had like originally started and had a different name, and then you were like, no, actually I wanted to distill, and then boom, went out with that. But, you know,
all the brewing was before I was brewing when I decided I wanted a YouTube channel, and I thought about doing a brewing channel, but the supply and demand was real out of whack. It was a lot of people making really cool brewing content already, and none of them were doing that great. The channels back then, they've improved more since then, I think. And once again, I think the pandemic was probably pretty good for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like I didn't have something specific to contribute to that area because there were so many people doing it.
Yeah.
You know, well already. Yeah.
Well, you've definitely like cemented yourself as a, pinnacle of the distilling community, I would say, especially on YouTube. If my math is right, I think you are the biggest distilling specific channel on YouTube. I know that the Whiskey Tribe is also the other crew, but there's not much else. And a lot of that is because, like you said, you have the advantage of being out in a country that will allow you to distill, especially even at a home kind of level. I have seen videos of people distilling here in the States, and I'm always like, man, you're just playing with fire. You know, it's just like waiting for somebody to come knocking at your door. So there's a lot of legalities there. So I think that's definitely helped. But also your channel content, the stuff you put out is super fun, and I always gravitate to it because like it hits this, it itches this scratch in my brain of like, yeah, what would happen if you did distill this thing, you know?
Yeah.
And you do such a fun job of like of making it fun and just teaching throughout the process too, and like talking about things, you know. I think that's really fun. You've definitely made yourself well known in the community, and that's super cool to see from start to now.
Yeah, thanks, man. I got lucky in a couple of ways too. I think especially with the kind of content we're creating on YouTube, we're never going to be Mr. Beast, right? It's never going to be like millions of viewers because there's just not that many people that actually care.
Yeah.
So it has to be almost by definition like a slow, gradual growth.
Right.
for the most part, right? You're not going to just make a video that suddenly does 30 million views in a week. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
So I got lucky that the job that I was working that sucked. I basically just I punched the clock at work. I did everything I needed to do, and I did absolutely nothing else. And it was a real freaking grind for a while. And the only reason I could do it is because my wife was so amazing, and so supportive of it. But it meant that I could just check out at work, come home, and then work another 25 to 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
Excuse me, after hours and on the weekends, for about 2.5 years. And I think that gave me enough to sort of get the ball rolling and get to a point where it was a no-brainer to keep going.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I think it's that point that's really hard for smaller, like super niche YouTubers to get to. Because there are some other people out there making awesome content. There was George from Barley and Hops, who was like the pioneer on YouTube for distilling. He's stopped now. Bearded and Board makes really dope stuff. Still Behind the Bench was amazing for the real technical and sciencey side of things. I haven't seen a video from him for a while. There is Beaver DIY out of South Africa. He's making really cool stuff. I'm sure I'll think of a couple more names along the way, and I'll shout them out when I think of it. But I guess my point is it's hard to get to that point where you can justify putting so many hours into it, right?
Right.
And dude, like our twins are 5 now. So I would have been going for probably 2.5 years when they were born. And I came home from work one night and basically I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm quitting. Like there's no way that I can work 40 hours a week. And at that point it was more like 50 hours a week at work, and then do another 20 or 30 hours a week on the channel and have any semblance of actually being a father.
Right.
And my wife was like, hell no, you're not giving up. Like, screw that. Like, all of us have sacrificed heaps for this, and it's right on the edge of doing it, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like so many YouTube channels get to that point. Like, you know, that stereotypical meme of the two miners, and one's like got this far away from the cache of diamonds and he's turned back. So I was lucky that it worked out that way. And then I was starting to think about dropping hours at work, like maybe going down to 4 days a week for a year, and then 3 days. And the pandemic hit. I lost my job. I was like, screw it. I'm just going to go full time on YouTube, because how am I going to get a job when we're not allowed to leave the house, kind of thing. So all of those things added up to, it got me over that hump of how do I carve time out for the channel to, no, this is my job now. And what do you know? Suddenly when you have
40 extra hours.
Of guilt-free, I'm not like pirating from the rest of my life.
Right.
It's easier to maintain it, you know.
Man, that's so, like, I love that. And you're right. This YouTube itself is a grind. And I think people sometimes think, especially when it comes to brewing content, like it's easy to make. You just put the stuff together and you walk away. It's like, well, I think the bigger challenge we face sometimes is that thing you've done, you might have started 6-8 months, a year earlier, before you get to the point where you're watching it. And it's just one of those, you never really know until you're in that moment. And some people just don't always relate to that. And I'm not going to fault those people, because I do the same thing. It's beeping in my room. Sorry. I was like, I don't know what's going on over there. But yeah, it's a grind, but it's still fun. And I love that. I love that you kept going too, and not just by your wife too. Obviously your wife, like you said, is probably the one who pushed you the most to keep going in unfortunate circumstances of losing a job. All right, so I'm transitioning us a little bit, because I want to talk about, I love getting to talk about YouTube, and I really want to pick your brain about your distilling experience when it comes to, especially mead. I want to talk a little bit about everything else too, but in your experience, I've seen a couple videos on your channel of you distilling mead. Now, my question here is, I'm sure you tasted the product prior to distilling, and then you go to the end product. How much of that honey character would you say is retained post distilling process generally?
This is an interesting one, man, because distilling does weird things with flavors that are in the wash. It can completely leave some flavors behind. You just get nothing that comes through. And fruit is kind of notorious for that. You make a fruit brandy and it tastes nice, but it tastes nothing like the fresh fruit often. Some flavors come through super heavy. Some flavors, they come through, but it pulls the flavor apart. Like what you think is a flavor is actually 4 or 5 flavors put together, and you'll only get like 2 of those, you know? And I honestly, going into distilling honey the first time, I thought almost none of the flavor was going to come through. I thought nothing was going to come through. Complete and utter opposite. It was super heavy. It actually, it almost, no, it did. It concentrated the flavor of honey compared to the mead that I'd made.
Interesting.
And that, I'm sure, and it'll be cool to talk to you about this kind of thing. I'm sure it would depend on the type of honey you're selecting,
right,
and the flavors that you find interesting in that honey. More light, sort of volatile, fruity, flowery kind of flavors, I think, are probably a little harder to carry across. Deeper, darker, grungier, coffee, chocolate, caramel, that like waxy, almost like honeycomb, like you know, eating the whole honeycomb thing. Those seem to carry over really well. So it blew my mind, man. I thought it was going to be basically come out kind of tasting like a weird vodka. I certainly didn't think it would taste literally like honey. And I really didn't think I'd get that really interesting kind of waxy honeycomb coming over. A lot of the honey I've played with has been seconds, and it's literally been like, you know, bucket scraping kind of things. So a lot of it has had a lot of, you know, the all of the byproduct from honey in it as well. That could contribute to it. But it's fun, man. It's real fun.
That's interesting.
Problem is it's super freaking expensive.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, I was at the homebrew shop yesterday, 2 days ago, and I bought stuff to do an all grain beer, and it came out for this 5-gallon batch. It was like $20, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is insane, because I spend for honey anywhere between, you know, $3 to $7 for a pound of honey, and then my 5-gallon batch is using 15 pounds. So I'm putting down $100 in just honey on this batch of mead, and I've gotten used to it at this point. So when I see the opposite, I'm like, oh, beer is cheap. Like, why don't I just make beer? Like, I could have so much money in my pocket if I just would make beer at this point. But it's totally fun.
Distilling's even worse too, man, because if you do a like a 23 liter ferment and you hit an ABV of 8%, you might get like a bottle and a half of good spirit out the other end. Maybe more if you can get away with tighter cuts, or if you want to proof it down, you know, more to 40%. But yeah, it doesn't go far.
So what do you start with as far as like your ABVs then? Because again, I don't know much about distilling, and you said 8%. Is that like a normal starting point, or do you try to push for like 14, 15 plus?
I tend to go on the, well, I think I tend to align more with what a lot of commercial distilleries will do. So 8% would be on the low side, 12% would be pushing fairly high. A lot of that often has to do with logistics. So if you're making an all grain beer, unless you've got some serious skullduggery going on with boiling or doing a weird thing where you're like sparging multiple times, but the second and third sparge go back into the kettle for the next mash. Like, unless you're doing something like that, you're going to really struggle to get over 10%. but also it's just kind of a case of not stressing yeast out. Also, because we're distilling, it's not like beer, wine, mead, where everything that goes into the fermenter you end up drinking.
Yep.
We're going to pull it all apart and put it back together again at the end. So really, it's not what the ABV is; it's the total content of sugar. So when you get to that point where you're like, well, my fermenter's currently sitting at 1075, but I could sparge again, and it's going to come out at 1025. It's going to drop the overall ABV, but the total amount of sugar in the fermenter is going to be more, so you'll get more product at the end, if that makes sense.
Interesting. I've always wondered about that.
Yeah, you can kind of mess around. There's advantages to both, dude. Like if you're pot distilling, the higher the ABV in the pot, the higher the percentage you're going to get out at the end. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. Distilling is one of the, like, in my mind, almost any decision you make in distilling, it's not good versus bad. It's just another lever that you're pushing or pulling to kind of nudge the flavor profile in one direction.
Yeah.
But yeah, I sit 8% would be on the low side, 12% would be on the high side.
Interesting.
For almost everything that I make. Yeah.
So this feels like a dumb question, but I'm going to ask, does clarity matter at all when it comes to distilling, or is that end result always going to be clear? Like if you had just making a mead, and you just pull it out post fermentation and it's cloudy as can be, is it going to end up clear?
Yeah. So distillation will almost always end up clear, unless you screw something up. So you can have a thing called a puke or a boil over, where you get too hot in the still, and when you hit a hot break in a boil, it's kind of the same thing. Like especially the proteins mess with the surface tension, bubbles form, and they just keep forming and don't pop, and just the liquid will go all the way through the still. So you'll get some of the actual wash or the ferment in the final product, which will make it cloudy. Unless you do that, or unless you've got a buildup of something in the still that's dissolving as you're distilling, it's going to be clear. The thing that you do need to consider is that some yeasts, when you put them into the pot and boil them, the cell walls are going to rupture with any yeast you put in there.
Right. Yeah.
The difference is that some yeasts end up tasting like nasty ass autolysis when they rupture. And some yeasts actually end up adding kind of an interesting flavor in doing that. So if you're using a yeast that is kind of tried and true for distillation, one of the three things that I care about for yeast is that what does it taste like when you boil it?
Right.
And as long as you're doing that, super cloudy. I mean, like bourbon, they distill everything. So it's on grain.
Really?
All of the yeast is in it. There's no like trube that gets left behind because it's just all corn. So the whole thing goes into the pot.
Wow.
Yeah. A single malt is generally on the clearer side because it's fermented off grain, like just like you're making a beer. So that is an advantage when I was making the mead and then distilling it. I don't have to wait for ages.
Yeah.
It's kind of like let it ferment out dry. Maybe give it a little bit of time if you want to get some lacto action or some more acid in there. Whack it in the still. Yeah.
Well, so I like all these terms. The distilling terms are fun to me. What did you call a puke or what was the other one?
Well, it's all like it's all forum.
Oh yeah. I just thought that's fun.
A lot of what I use,
we need more of those in the mead world. We need more of those like terms like that. They're just kind of fun. Oh my gosh, I had something. So whenever you are, what do you call? I guess what do you call a mead that's been distilled? Because in my world, I've heard it called Honeyshine. I don't know what else to call it.
Yeah, dude, I literally put a I can't remember if it was in the video or after the video. I literally asked people to submit their ideas on what they think it's called, because I still don't know. I don't know if there's like a technical proper term for it. If there are, I'm sure there'll be like regional
Yeah.
names for specific products that are made with honey. Honeyshine, honey brandy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, dude. I don't know.
Well, I've always wondered that because Honeyshine sounds right to me, but I mean, it's like whenever last time I had Honeyshine, it was truly off the not tap, off of the pot still, and I would not. I got a little sick that night because I don't know if we'll kind of talk about this. I know the differences roughly. I roughly know the differences of the stages of heads. Is it heads, shots, and tails? Is that the three?
Hearts, tails.
Sorry. So at that point, I don't think we're really discriminating against them at all, and we were just kind of going off and seeing what was going to happen there. But that's where you talk about, you mentioned blending earlier. For people who don't know distilling, the heads are the start, right? And then hearts are the head is mostly like the super high proof stuff. Is that true? I guess explain it to me because I'm going to butcher it.
Yeah, sure. So there's two types of distillation. There's pot distillation and reflux distillation. And we can get into the differences between those if you want.
Yeah,
but the simple answer is reflux is basically if you're making vodka, it'll get up to about 95% ABV and it'll just stay there the whole run. Pot distillation it'll start 85-ish% and it'll just slowly drop in ABV all the way down. For something like honey, if I was distilling honey, I like doing double pot distillation. That I just think I enjoy more grungy flavors. I don't care about quote unquote smooth. Yeah. I'd rather something be want to fight me a little bit more if that means that I get more flavor. So I err on the side of pot distillation.
When you say double, you mean you just take everything that you got essentially from all three stages and then put it back in and run it one more time? Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yeah. So pretty much all single malts out of Scotland will be double distillation. Some bourbons are still a lot of traditional brandies, rakias, all of that sort of stuff is double pot distillation. So the idea is you start with a fermenter that's 3 to 4 times the size of your still. So let's do easy math here. Let's say your still is 50 liters capacity. You'll make 150 to 200 liters of wash. Take 50 liters out, put it into the still, run it from beginning to end. You're not making any cuts. You're not trying to select certain what you do and don't want. All you're doing is just cutting down on volume and raising the ABV because like we said before, a pot still, the ABV you put in is going to equal a certain ABV coming out. So you need to raise that ABV to get to the average of 50, 55% at the end, right? So you'll do that 3 or 4 times. Basically, you'll take wash out of the still, out of the fermenter, put it into the still, distill it, and keep that. The stuff that's coming out of those stripping runs are called low wines. We keep the low wines. We just keep doing it until the fermenter's empty. And if you do 3 or 4 times through the still, you'll end up with enough low wines to fill the still again.
Okay.
So now you're starting to understand why this stuff's really freaking expensive. Yeah. It gets crazy. So you put all the low wines back into the pot still, and then you run the pot still again, and that's when you'll make the cuts. This is another thing where colloquial terms come into play, and people will sometimes use the same name to mean different things, or use different names to mean the same thing, or they'll distinguish between different things and split them up. Right. Home distilling language is you have 4 shots at the beginning, which is a small amount that you just collect and throw away and never use again, or use it for firelighter or cleaning windows, whatever you want to do. A lot of the nastier stuff lives up there. Some methanol, acetone, just chemicals that don't taste great and you don't want to drink.
Right.
That's a very, very small amount. Get rid of it. Then you've got the heads, which is kind of the transition down towards hearts. And a big part of the art of distillation is trying to pick where the exact point where you're going to say, this stuff I'm not keeping. I'm going to you can recycle that later on. And now this is the part that we are keeping.
Yeah.
So then you'll hit hearts. And I'm a really heavy believer that the only way to figure out where that point is by your senses. So taste, touch, smell. If you are making the same recipe over and over again on the same still day in, day out, and you're good at controlling all of the factors, like sure, you can use temperature coming off this temperature at the top of the still, you can use ABV, you can use volume. But if you're running a recipe that you haven't made 15 times before, you just have to taste it. And pick it. We can get into the nerdy stuff on any of the stuff if you want. So if there's somewhere you want to hit, well, let me know.
I guess on that, the tasting side, I'm curious because that is not something I've mostly tasted spirits that are the end result, end product. And you're talking about the 4 shots being the not so great kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Basically, you're saying, so for most people who are going to distill at home and, you're running your still in whatever, your backyard, you're tasting that stuff along the way. And you'll find that transition point from, oh my gosh, I'm getting a lot of acetone, all those kind of funky flavors to like, well, I'm getting less. So you'd say that's the start of your hearts at that point or your heads?
So the tricky thing is it'll depend a lot on what you're making. So heads and especially tails will present really differently based on the ingredients and how you prepared it. But for me, heads will go from quite often smelling acetaldehyde, right, is the green apple component. There'll be a heap of that up front, and it's almost more you can just smell it coming out of the still.
Interesting.
Almost more than on the liquid itself. And then it'll go to a point where it feels like it's cleaned up. It'll start tasting almost like I should say too, a lot of like really estery, florally. They almost smell delicious, but they taste horrible.
Oh, interesting.
Kind of fake, potpourri, fake fruit, like fruit burst lollies sometimes even. And then you'll get to a point where that cleans up and it almost tastes and almost smells like vodka. It just tastes clean. It's a trap. It's a total trap. Because right after that, it's going to go into this. Yeah, it's going to go into this weird thing where it starts to get somewhere between. It's kind of acrid, I guess you'd say. Just the mouthfeel of it is wrong. It can smell like not burnt rubber, but just straight up rubber. So kind of like fixing a bike tire. Like that kind of weird, stinky. Stuck in a confined space rather in the tube. Baby spew, like real little infant baby that kind of has that sweet, milky, but slightly off smell. It can taste almost like cement, and I don't mean like licking the pavement. I mean, if you've ever mixed cement, that kind of weird, minerally, almost stainless steely kind of feeling you get in your mouth if there's just cement in the air. It'll get to that, and then when that cleans up, generally that's the point where you're going to hit hearts. Often at the beginning of the hearts, you won't get a lot of contribution from the ingredient, and it's going to depend on the kind of ingredient you're using. So the tricky thing with fruit is that a lot of the fruit flavors are very volatile compounds, and they want to come off at the beginning of the run. The problem is they're mixed in with all that crap that we just described that you don't want.
Right.
So the real art with brandy is how much crap from the spirit do I allow myself to take to collect as much of the fruity flavors. So then you'll hit hearts, and the fun thing about distillation is that depending on the size of still you're running, but every maybe 15, 20 minutes, the flavor will change, and you're just slowly going down from more volatile to less volatile compounds that are coming off the still. So if you have something like a honey, you might be getting the kind of more floral notes at the beginning, and then you'll move into perhaps the sort of lighter baking spice, so cinnamon. You'll start to get kind of caramel and chocolate flavors come over, and then maybe something kind of grassy. It generally goes from light fruity flavors through to grungy, earthy flavors.
Interesting.
Throughout time. And then the job is to pick the difference between hearts and tails. So tails can present wildly differently depending on the product you're making. They'll quite often be like wet, soggy cardboard, or for those that are into, craft beverages, like really oxidized.
Yeah.
Just bad. If you've ever had an IPA that's just been warm and hot for ages, and maybe the oxygen control wasn't too bad,
right,
that kind of flavor can creep in. And then that'll turn into almost like a wet, stinky dog. You've taken your dog to the beach and now you've got a 20-minute drive home in a hot car, that kind of smell.
Yeah.
It can be cementy again. It can be all kinds of funky, from almost like kimchi sort of flavors, like just straight up jock strap, or gym socks. Like, can get real toe jammy.
Yeah, man.
And once again, there's no right or wrong. Like, sometimes a little bit of those flavors are actually what you're after.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then you'll switch over to tails and keep the stuff in the middle.
So, you mentioned two different distilling methods. Pot still, your ABV coming down over time. The other, why, I don't remember the term you used. Pot still, what's the other one? The, my internet's getting funky. Can you hear me?
Sorry, I've lost you again. Oh, yep, you're back.
All right, cool.
I
don't know what's going on. Yeah, it's
right
weird.
when you're like, am I here? But I missed the 30 seconds before.
So you mentioned the two different methods for distilling. Pot still versus, I don't remember the term you used for the other one.
Reflux.
Reflux. Why does reflux keep it at such a higher proof the whole time?
Yeah, cool. So a pot still is a super basic piece of equipment. It's literally something to boil the liquid in, something to kind of direct the vapor up through the still. And sometimes that'll be a column. Sometimes it'll be those big, beautiful onion domes, helmets, whatever you want to call them. And then the line arm over to the condenser. So it's just basically a pipe that then cools the vapor back down into a liquid. What a reflux still does is instead of sending the vapor straight through to the condenser that puts it into your collection jar, the vapor goes up through the column and you'll have another condenser sitting above it. So vapor comes up and then we're actively cooling some of that vapor to send it back down through the column. Oh. And in the column, there'll be, so a pot still is just empty. There's nothing inside. But a reflux still will have something that forces interaction between liquid and vapor. And that can come in all sorts of different forms. For home distillers, for hobbyists, quite often that's what we call packing. And that'll be marbles, rasher rings, copper scrubbies, stainless steel scrubbies, anything that basically makes one little drip of liquid take a long ass time to get all the way down the bottom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You can also have bubble plates, which are the beautiful things that you see in slow motion videos of all the distilleries that have them.
Yeah.
It's a copper plate with, we call them upcomers or downcomers or caps. And essentially they're like little airlocks that force the vapor going up has to go up through the upcomer, and then it's forced back down into a bath of liquid that's sitting on top of the tray. And the liquid that's going down can't go back through those same airlocks. It has to fall down the bottom. So all it's doing is forcing interaction between liquid and vapor. So with a bubble plate, you've got the liquid bubbling and dancing on the plate, looking awesome. With a packing, you've just got it falling down through the middle. Mm-hmm. And as the liquid falls back down, the vapor coming up strips the lighter components out of the water. The liquid. It's not water. And the liquid going down strips the heavier components out of the vapor going up.
Whoa.
So
cool.
the net result is that anything that goes up through the still is almost like being redistilled over and over and over and over and over and over again as it's climbing up through the still. So if you have a really efficient reflux still with a really tall column or 30 odd plates, you could put 2% into the pot and get 95% out of the other end.
You just need that billion gallons of brew at that point to get enough.
Yeah. I mean, you'd be dumb to do it, but you can.
YouTube video. There's a YouTube video.
10, 15% in the pot, or you can do stripping runs again and put 40% into the pot.
Yeah.
And it'll produce 95% from the beginning all the way until it gets down to that point where the still's just not powerful enough to get it up to 95% from the percentage in the pot. So the interesting thing there is that you're taking heads, hearts, tails, all at the same ABV. And it's just a flavor thing. It's the components that are coming out. With a pot still, you've also got the ABV to kind of give you an idea of what's happening, because it'll start at 85%. Normally, if you're in a reasonable range, you're probably cutting to heads to hearts at about somewhere between 75 to 80% ABV, and then you'll be cutting to tails somewhere between 45% would probably be pretty low. 55-60% would probably be pretty high. So it's just two very different types of distillation.
Yeah. So which one? Maybe this might be a controversial. I don't know if it's controversial. Which one's a more artful tact? It's more of an art, in your opinion, between the two distilling.
That's styles. A really good question, dude. I would say there's a lot more skill involved in running a reflux still to really understand what's happening in the still and be able to kind of fine tune all of the things that are going on in it. But once it's running well, most of the time the goal is then to just make the product as clean as possible. So it's either it's not binary, but it's more binary. The difference between good and bad is a lot more defined with reflux.
Yeah.
And you'll see that in the run too. It'll go from being terrible, 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 terrible. Oh crap, it's actually really good. And it'll be really, really good for ages, and then suddenly it's horrible.
Interesting.
With a pot still, it's easier to run, but it's just a gradual slope.
Yeah.
So there's no defined point. There's no like big dramatic change to be like, oh, that's the point where we switch.
So, and there's a lot more blending that happens with pot stilling from what I can, well, I guess you probably, with reflux, it sounds like you still might do some blending, right? Or is it not any at all at that point? You know what I mean? Yeah,
so you could talk about blending in two ways. One is with a pot still, because you've got this gradual slope, you can even kind of like single out individual flavors along the way.
Yeah.
And decide to keep them or throw them out. There's a really kind of old school technique. What do they call it? I think they called it sweet water, like the old sort of American moonshiners and American bourbon makers, where they would get to tails and then keep going past tails, and they get to what they call the sweet water. And that was kind of, I don't know, probably down around 10, 15%. And then they would recollect that to then proof the final product down.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, so you can do things where you're like, this section, this fraction of the run is nasty, but there might be something good below it.
Interesting.
So you can blend like that. So you're sort of blending off the still. Then there's always the blending on the far end as well, which is more of a, what's the best way to describe it? The best way to describe it is the stuff that you're making on the still, and this mostly applies to maturated or aged spirits. You make something on the still, you put it into a barrel, and you let it maturate for whatever, 1 to 15, 30 years. Those are ingredients, not the final product.
Okay.
And then the blender's job is to come along and sample them all and add them together in some ratio to get the final product that you want out the other end.
Interesting.
And we hear it all the time with distilling questions. Oh, I really like Pappy, Maker's Mark,
Yeah.
whatever. How do I make that? Well, here's the recipe. But if you make 100 barrels at that recipe, you'll almost never hit Maker's Mark.
Yeah.
The magic in those products is being able to taste, assess, and then blend all of those ingredients, aka like the barrels, into a product that's consistent and tastes like what you expect it to taste like.
Right. Well, I guess on that note, you're talking about tasting side. One thing I struggle with when it comes to knowing, like, I'll taste a bourbon or whiskey or something, and I can go online and look at the tasting notes or things that people have said about it. But I don't have the great ability to be like, I'm picking up these things without that help. Do you have like advice on like how to develop your palate for spirits? Because I feel like with the higher ABV, it's kind of hard to sometimes do that.
Totally, man. Spirits are weird, dude. For a long time for me, it just tasted like Bernie as well.
Yeah.
And it was like, this is bourbon Bernie, that's single malt Bernie. I can kind of tell the difference. Oh, that's gin. That tastes real different, but it still just mostly tastes like Bernie. The biggest piece of advice I ever got on that front was, it sounds so silly now saying it, but the first thing you do after you sip is breathe out. So breathe in, sip, swallow, breathe out. Because your whole digestive tract is full of probably flammable vapor, right?
Yeah.
So you breathe in and that all goes straight down into your lungs.
Right.
And then your body's like, oh, that's horrible. So if you drink, swallow, and then breathe out, all of that vapor's gone. And you also get the additional benefit of having the retronasal sensation. And a lot of what we think of as flavor is not flavor, it's actually aroma. So we get to benefit from that.
Yeah.
So if you're not doing that already, to anyone listening, do it. It'll change the way you drink spirits, I promise you.
Yeah. I'm about to try that tonight. Do a little research.
Yeah. Give it a go, man. It really is crazy how much it helps. And then once you get to the point where you do that without thinking about it, it'll change again because you don't have that slight thing in the back of your mind going, is this going to suck when I drink this?
Right.
The other thing is, dude, it sounds like trying to be the tough guy or He-Man or whatever, but you'll just get to a point where it just doesn't faze you anymore as well. And it isn't drinking lots and lots and lots. It's just having a little bit every now and again. And I'll still notice too, dude, like I haven't drunk straight spirits for probably 3 days now. And the first couple of sips I have will be really hard for me to taste anything. And then I'll get back into it. But you will get to the point where you just don't notice the alcohol at all. Right. And it's kind of when the first impression that you get from a spirit is, oh, this is Bernie. Once that starts to fade, all the flavors will come out for you. I think the other thing that's really important is just building up a mental pathway of flavors. And so I'm not big into the science on it, but what I do know is that aroma especially is kind of the most emotional of senses. And everyone's experienced this. You'll walk into a building and you'll be like, it's my nana's pantry.
Yeah.
And something just goes off in your head, right? But you can't for the life of you figure out what that is. You're like, I don't even know what that smells like.
Right.
But it's my nana's pantry. And then if you sit there and really think about it for a long time, you'd be like, it's cinnamon. It's cinnamon, but weird old, like oxidized cinnamon mixed in with Nan's perfume or whatever,
Right.
But making that jump from emotional reaction to being able to pinpoint what the flavor is can be really hard. But the more you do it, the more it's easy to kind of make that leap between the two. So quite often you'll find when you smell something or taste something, you'll get a weird reaction to it. And a lot of the things that people say that sound really wanky and stupid. Oh, it's like a warm summer's night walking through the meadows. You're like, dude, that's stop.
Come on, that's just
dumb. But there's probably something in that, right? Like
Right.
if you really thought about it, you're like, oh, okay, it's not a warm, it's, I don't know, whatever, dandelions.
Right. Right.
Do you know
right.
what I mean? There'll be a specific flavor
Yeah.
to it. So I think that one of the easiest ways to get from that kind of impulsive thing to actually being able to pull flavors out is to, whenever you get the chance, just smell stuff and taste stuff and like actually think about what it tastes like. So if you're walking through the supermarket, stop and pick up every fruit you can and smell it.
Yeah.
And be like, orange. This is freaking orange. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The other thing that I found really helpful is to pull up tasting notes for a specific spirit. The big breakthrough for me was, I don't remember the spirit now. This is crazy. It was such like a core memory for me, and now I've forgotten it. It might have been Johnny Walker Black. I want to say it was Johnny Walker Black. And I had a Whiskey Tribe video up, and they were saying raisins. Tastes like, smells like raisins. And I just couldn't get it for the life of me. It's like, there is no raisins in this.
Right.
And in the end, I got up, walked to the kitchen, grabbed a box of raisins, and then just sat there and like smelt the raisins, smelt the whiskey, tasted the raisins, tasted the whiskey for about 15 minutes. And then all of a sudden it just clicked. I was like, holy crap, that's been there the whole time.
Yeah.
And like my brain was stuck on that's whiskey. It just tastes like whiskey, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite often really helpful too, is to pull out something that literally smells like the tasting note, go through the tasting note, find people you trust that aren't just going to bullshit you. Cause there's a lot of stuff out there that I think is just kind of over the top.
Right. Yeah.
And literally grab the thing. If they're saying it's oranges or it smells like old leather, like go and find something that is literally old leather and smell it.
That's where
and taste.
I've heard that the old leather actually is one that I don't know. It was another podcast I was listening to, and they were like, "I'm getting notes of this, and old leather," and then they talked about the nostalgic experience of, walking in my grandpa's house, and I smelling his cigars and his old leather chair, and sitting in his old leather chair and stuff like that. And I think you're right. There is so much power to those nostalgic aromas, but just like you said, I don't always know them. I mean, I'm like, I get the smell, but like, I don't always sit there and break down what I'm smelling. I'm just like, oh, I know that, I recognize it, and then I just keep on with my day. But that's super fun. Yeah. I need to stop and like do more with that now, and not just let myself walk through life sometimes.
Yeah, totally. It's fun to do it with other people too. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I'm good at describing flavors. Relatively, like I'm okay at it. Once I figure out what they are and once I can actually taste them. But my palate is shot, dude. Like I smoked for 15 years.
Yeah.
I'm just that guy that likes the strongest flavor of everything.
Right.
So my instrument is screwed up.
Yeah.
The software that's running is good, but the hardware is shot. My wife's the complete and utter opposite. She's excellent at picking up tastes in very small amounts, but she can't describe them for the life of her. I made I think it was a vodka. I don't know. I made something, and she just kept telling me it tastes like the fish aisle in an aquarium shop. I was like, dude, how do I process that? And my mind was thinking like slightly damp, mildewy, like kind of like off fish. Maybe like moss or something. I just couldn't pick it. And then I can't remember what happened. I think we were cleaning or something. And she said, oh, that smells like the vodka. Oh. And I realized that it was spray and wipe.
Oh, interesting.
Because that's what they clean the glass with
in
the fish aisle.
Huh. Man.
So,
interesting.
There you go.
Yeah. Wow. That's kind of, that's fun because my wife has a great palate too. And she definitely, like, I'll bring something to her, and she kind of hates this game that I play with her sometimes. I'll just like walk in and be like, I won't tell her what it is. Like, here you go, drink this real fast and tell me what you think it is. And she doesn't like the game, but it is definitely like she'll say things that make me go, oh, I didn't pick that up. or that, like you're saying, now I get that. That's what I've been trying to say this whole time. So that's kind of fun to bring it to your wife or a friend or stuff like that. Those tasting notes are not always singular person. At least where I've learned the most, it's not always singular person.
No, totally. And they're subjective too, right? Subjective in that we can be both tasting the same thing. You like it and I hate it. But also just in terms of literally what you taste, I've had plenty of situations where someone is swearing up and down black and blue that they taste X. And I'm sitting on the other side going, nah.
Yeah. Like, I don't get it, but
it happens. Yeah.
Right. It's like, yeah, you're right. It's like, you're not wrong, but I don't experience that. So it's hard to, I don't know. That's what, for Mead at least, has been really tough is, as I'm sure you've tried, maybe a couple different honeys. There are so many different things you get from honey sometimes. And it's like, I love the fact that distilling changes the flavors. And I have a theory I'm going to bring up here in a second, but the different, I don't know if it's true. It's more, I had a thought earlier and I was like, maybe this is relevant. All those different honey characters can, like, how do I say this? You're basically grasping at like a 10 or 12 different descriptors per honey, unless it's like a honey bear honey, which is like clover. Most of the time clover honey, I feel like it's like one or two things, but you go outside of that realm and you're like, wildflower, oh my gosh, I get this and this and this, and holy cow, it's all these different flowers and stuff like that. But it's interesting to get people's reactions. Oh, okay, so here's my theory. Honey, in the distilling process, I'm sure that, I don't know what temp most distilling happens at, but I'm assuming it's like 150 and above, right? For like most
the liquid itself, or
So what temp does liquid have to get for you to really start to distill and get those proofs?
I mean, the temperature keeps changing depending on the chemical makeup in the pot. So if you've got like a lot of residual sugar in there, the temperature will go up. If it's higher ABV, the temperature will go down. But I mean, it's all close-ish to boiling. So for us, that's 100 degrees Celsius.
Right.
What is it? 212 or something?
Yeah. So my thought is, I wonder if, because like you look at old mead making practices or stuff now, we don't really ever we don't ever boil honey or the must. We kind of avoid those things because of the idea that you're going to boil off the floral notes and all those things within the honey. I'm wondering if even in a closed vacuum, so to speak, of distilling, if you're losing some of those honey floral notes, characters, those things in the distilling process because of the heat. That's my thought there.
Yeah, so this is an interesting talking point, and it comes up semi-regularly for all sorts of different things in distillation. And there's two ways to look at it. One is a lot of the fresh flavors that you get, just with anything. If you take apples and then boil the snot out of them, like apple sauce tastes very different than apple.
Right.
So there's that kind of idea of you're killing the more volatile stuff. The devil's advocate position to that is that when you're killing those flavors in a product, what's happening is you're volatilizing them and they're just disappearing off into the atmosphere. With distillation, what we're doing is we're recondensing all of those things that boil off and capturing them. So it's almost like the floral stuff that you're boiling off, that's what ends up in the
interesting. Okay.
In the jar at the end.
Yeah.
So then the tricky part where I think reality sits is how volatile are we talking? Because the stuff that's super volatile, that's back to the same problem we had with the fruit, right? Like, so that's coming off really near the beginning of the run. And unfortunately, we're going to have to ditch a lot of that interesting stuff because it's just too headsy. So if it's sort of stuff that sits in the middle, we might be able to keep it. And there are techniques that we use in distillation to combat that. So when you make a gin, for example, you make a vodka, you take all the cuts, you get rid of all the heads, all the tails. We just have the hearts, and then we put all the botanicals into just hearts and redistill it again. So you're not having to fight between flavor and heads. You could do that with honey too. So I don't know, man. It's a tricky one.
Yeah.
I totally agree that the more floral, kind of even some of the more sort of herbaceous flavors in honey, the fruity flavors in honey, they're going to be a lot harder to keep
Yeah.
in the final product compared to the more grungy,
Yeah.
heavy flavors.
Well, I just want, I'm mainly going off of mead knowledge and people who kind of preach that you never heat your honey. And that's
Yeah.
the big thing when you buy honey. It's like you want to find stuff that's unpasteurized, unfiltered, because at that point when you are using honey that has been through a pasteurization process or filtered, sometimes you're getting a loss of flavors or those important things that you really want. And so I'm just kind of running with that idea and applying it again blindly because I've never really, I have no knowledge. So anybody listening now thinking I'm saying anything that's relatively true towards distilling is don't believe me. Believe Jesse. He's the one who's been through it. So,
I mean, I'm talking specifically about actually distilling it, right? And we kind of don't have a choice. You've got to heat it up to distill it. What we do have a choice with, though, is the same choice that you have, which would be not heating the honey to get it into the must or into the wash. And I'd be totally on board. I would completely agree with that. I mean, I think the giant thing that we haven't talked about at all, and I'm excited to talk to you about, is honey selection. Because it's where I grew up and where my parents still live. There's a honey farm, I guess you call it, relatively close by, and they have a really cool display out of there'll be 15, 20 different honeys that have been collected from different areas that they have a good idea of what they are.
That's fun.
Out on display for you to taste, and they often have the they'll go and pick like a bouquet of the fresh, there'll be manuka or clove or whatever, so you can kind of smell that as well. So I've had some introduction to it, and that blows my freaking mind, dude. Like everything from it just straight up tastes like mochaccino through to like weird, funky, crazy. It almost tastes more like a savory, kind of like a stir fry sauce or something. I don't know.
It is. It's a wide range. I love that about honey, though. That's kind of my favorite thing. Is even in now 6+ years of mead making, and I've bought every honey I can buy essentially around me. I've still only scratched the surface of these different ones. And then every time I buy one, I try to do a traditional mead to play with that character and whatever honey it is, and just kind of understand that what's eucalyptus honey going to give me, but then also to find a pairing and say like, what is eucalyptus honey going to be paired well with. And I'll only make one of probably 10,000 possible recipes with it, but still getting to play with the different things. It is so wild to me, but it has been, like you said, going back to sensory training, having the experience of, maybe walking past that one bush that one time and smelling those flowers and going, oh, I do get that, whatever sort of, I'm going to use rose, even though it's very generic. I do get that rose kind of smell from this honey. Is super helpful. But I would recommend, like you said, you have 20 around you. It'd be fun to see like a side-by-side of what happens when you have different ones. What do you get from all these different honeys?
Yeah, totally, man. I feel like there's so much possibility with honey too, because it just seems like it's such a, I don't know how to describe it, but it seems like flavors that come in honey seem to pair with other things really well. I don't know quite how to describe that, but honey is so complementary in all its forms to so many other flavors. It's almost like juniper, cool. That's a real specific flavor. It's really strong. And I don't see flavor combinations being so expansive with something like juniper. Maybe it's a perception thing. I don't know. But there's so many ways that you could take it. Like you could basically make a botanical distilled mead. So use the same technique that you use for a gin but for honey.
Interesting.
Fortified meads, I think, would be really fun because you would be able to distill mead and then proof the distillate down with mead, or proof the mead up with distilled mead.
Man.
And you could get, maybe that would be the fun place where we can have the pairing of the dark, grungy honey flavors being concentrated and the light, floral, fruity honey flavors being preserved in fresh mead, and stick them together. And of course, all of the things that you can do with mead too, like, pairing it with basically any other fermented beverage there is.
Right. Man, you got me thinking
so
now.
A lot to do there.
I would love. It is a shame that distilling is not as legal here. There's a company that has wanted to. They've offered a pot still to me probably 8 times at this point, and it's this company who they just do a lot of stuff, and I'm always like, it'd be fun to do, but they want me to post a video of doing that, and I personally don't feel like getting in trouble for something. Well,
especially you've got a good thing going, right? Like, it's not just some guy messing around in this shed. It's like you've got a business to run, and you're putting that business at jeopardy by doing something that you probably shouldn't.
Right.
In the business, not just some dude by him,
Yeah.
I get it, man. I get it.
But you saying that, though, to fortify, I mean, like, I think we both think in terms of YouTube videos sometimes. Like, my brain goes to, I like the video title being, I fortified a mead with distilled mead. And it's like, that just, for anybody who's mead oriented would be like, oh, I want to watch that. Because, like, what the heck did he do? That's crazy. Probably not going to be the thing I'll end up doing. But YouTube wise, that would hit the mark, I would say. Yeah,
totally. Are you able to send mead? Like, can you post mead?
Well, it is up in the air. You're not really supposed to ship alcohol. You can do it in certain, like the U.S. Postal Service, you're not supposed to. FedEx and UPS and stuff, you can. It's just, you kind of have to be a little more, for lack of a better term, sly about it,
What are you talking about? It's olive oil.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, there's a lot of things. I used to buy little Tic Tac boxes and like take out some Tic Tacs so that whenever I would ship something, if they like shook the box, you'd hear the Tic Tacs rattling in it instead of the liquid. Because I was always afraid that, man, one day someone's just going to really start shaking that box and be like, oh, I hear some liquid in here, Yeah, so. Right. But there's ways. I'd ship a lot of mead, and I've got 2 boxes right now that I'm about to ship off to some friends. And I thought about reaching out and trying to do something to you, but then I was like, what's the likelihood of me getting something to you in one piece? Well, it's like, I have no idea.
Well, that was why I was asking, dude. Like, maybe there's a collaboration to be had. So technically, I can only distill for my own personal use. I'm not allowed to give it away. Definitely not allowed to sell it. Not allowed to trade it. Nothing. What I am allowed to do is submit samples to experts to see if it is the way it should be.
I'm your expert.
Well, you're a mead expert, right? So it would be pretty interesting to send some distilled mead to a mead expert.
Ooh.
So I think I could, and let's face it, it's not like, it's one thing if it's like, here's 14 bottles of 50% ABV. If it's like a little sample bottle to mess around with, Anyway, so it's off the top of my dome here, dude, and we can talk about this off here, but what if I made a really grungy, heavy honey into mead and distilled it, and you made the opposite, and we tried blending them afterwards.
I am all for this. I'm game for this. I think it'd be super fun.
Yeah, cool. We'll make a plan, eh?
We will make a plan. Yeah, you heard it here, folks. You can look forward to that. That's going to be exciting. I really did think about, even for this episode, it was going to be, probably would not have made it in time in the time we talked about doing this episode, but like sending something to you as well. Obviously, I think that there's ways to get it overseas. So I just got to explore those avenues a little bit better in life. But I like going back to your channel going back to watching the times I've watched you do those distilling mead videos, I find it so fascinating to do something like, I don't want to say you're doing the opposite of what I'm doing, because you're not. You're expounding on like something that every mead maker wants to do, which is I don't want to do this. A lot of mead makers want to make a really high proof mead. That is like right. I mean, you go on Facebook forums, you go on Reddit, you go on those things, and people are like, I made a 25% mead with bread yeast. And you're like, no, you didn't. You know, it's like stuff like that. So, but people are always so proud of making these super high alcohol meads. And so to distill it, obviously, you're changing the form of it from truly mead to a term we've yet to define at this point. Mm-hmm. But yeah. It's just kind of fun to see it in that light. And I've only had it one other time. I think we'd kind of mentioned this. I'd talked about it before, I think before we started recording. But it is, in that little experience, I don't know how true it was, because we were just going straight off the little pot still in that moment. And I don't know if what point it was at, if we were getting the best stuff or the low end things, but it was really interesting to try it and see
totally
what happens to honey. It's just weird. After so much use of raw honey, to see it go through a change is fun.
Yeah, man, definitely. It's just such a elusive ingredient too, in a lot of ways, right? Like the way it's produced, that's crazy when you really think about bees making honey. It's
weird,
kind of like alchemy in the first place.
Yeah,
and then it's I don't know, man. It's just fun. It's a cool ingredient to play with. I mean, there's the whole idea too of back sweetening distilled spirits with honey, which
does that ever really explored. Happen? Do you ever, like with a spirit, do people ever back sweeten in general? Is that a thing that
totally
happens?
Yeah. I mean, I've used honey in liqueurs before, like as a sweetener.
Okay.
So yeah, anything that's a liqueur has got a shitload of sugar in it from some form, right?
Yeah.
And often it'll take a lot of sugar to start moving the needle in terms of perception of sweetness and flavor. But that little bit of sweetness is it's like seasoning too. So if you have especially fruits, more delicate kind of any flavor that you think of as sweet in your head, will more often than not end up tasting more like that flavor when you add a little bit of sugar into the final product.
Right.
Because distillation by nature means there's not going to be any sugar in the final product.
Yeah.
But we'll often end up with something that tastes sweet, not because it is sweet, but because it tastes kind of like vanilla and blackberry. And those are sweet flavors in my head, you know?
Would you say that...
So if you actually make it sweet, then it triggers that sort of sensory process in your brain even more.
Interesting.
Sorry, though. I cut you off.
Oh, you're good. I was going to say, would you say that part of that perception or sweetness, you know, let's say you have your brew here and you back sweeten, and, you know, you said you have to add a lot to get it to even out. As time goes on, as time goes on and this alcohol gets less, present's not the word, hot, you know, that perception of alcohol is less hot. Do you feel like that sweetness rises up to meet that flavor component?
Do you mean as you add more and more sugar?
No, I mean as you let it age. Let's say you only add however much honey to get to here, and then you let it set for 10 years. Do you feel like that the scales would end up being more even because of the time and the less alcohol presence and heat that is perceived?
Yeah, totally. I think it is a balance thing. It's kind of like beer, right? Like if you had a shitload of hops into something, you can have a slightly higher final gravity, and the balance is going to work out more,
right?
And vice versa, right? So if it's, you know, if it doesn't have a big body to it, you probably don't want it to taste like licking a pine tree,
right?
The interesting thing is when you maturate in oak, you are actually getting sugar out of the barrel too. So that does change as well. But yeah, I would agree with you, dude. in general, the way spirits balance out well is if it is full of bigger, like barrel spice kind of flavors, nutmeg, cinnamon, clove, black
Mm-hmm.
pepper, that astringency that you get from wood sometimes. Often that pairs better with something that is a little bit more intense on the alcohol
Right.
feel, or you'll bottle it at a higher proof. So
Mm.
you'll bottle it 55, 60% ABV. In terms of balance,
Yeah.
and the inverse is quite often true too. So if you're wanting to present it to be like a really quote unquote smooth spirit, and you want it to come across sweeter, you'll
Mm-hmm.
quite often proof it down lower and have it be
Interesting.
really smooth.
Huh.
Of course, there's always those situations where screw balance mess, like we don't care about that. We're just going to go
Yeah.
all in on this one, and those are fun too sometimes.
Right.
But yeah, I think as a general rule of thumb, I think you're totally right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I say that because like tonight I've been sipping on this this piment, which is a grape and honey mixture. So it's a style. Anyways, and when I first drank this a long time ago, there was a lot of alcohol content. You could taste a lot of that heat, for lack of a better term, and some honey. And now I'm tasting it like 3 or 4 years later, and it's like all grape. And it's just like time really moves the needle on flavors. It just kind of, I feel like it's like a compass. You're just walking around in a forest sometimes, and you're just like pointing in directions, and it's like you always know it's something relative, but you're just turning all the time to see different things.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't know what happens in a mead as you age it.
Yeah.
I know in spirits, you get oxidization, esterification, and you're pulling all these crazy flavors out of the oak as well, which are then precursors to be oxidized and esterified and transesterified, and all sorts of crazy things happen. I imagine similar kind of things happen in mead, right? Like you're going to have some esters, you're going to have some acids and alcohols that'll esterify.
Yep.
You'll end up getting more than the sum of its parts at the beginning. There'll be like flavors that just pop up out of nowhere. Is that kind of what happens with me?
Yeah, I think it's also, I mean, relative to whatever flavors you're throwing in there. Like I'm still experimenting a lot with finding out what flavors change more over time. So, for example, like cinnamon. And whenever I've used cinnamon in a mead, I normally go lighter on my cinnamon profile because I've noticed, given time, it is doubles in value, so to speak, or doubles in flavor in mead experience for me, just with time. So stuff like that. But then, of course, I think the biggest thing is mostly with like high alcohol meads, high being 14, for us, we're like, man, 14%, holy cow, or like 18%, like chill out, it's way too high. But the that alcohol presence coming down to just reveal. It's kind of like you're just revealing the flavors that are already there. And the really good tasters, I wish I had this palate, are able to see through the alcohol burn, alcohol presence, and still get all of those notes that are there. I don't know how much like actual changing of flavors necessarily happens with mead. I think it's just blending and mellowing of flavors is what I would say.
Yeah, interesting. Have you played at all with oak aging mead?
Yeah, so I mean, most mead at this point I'm doing that is not carbonated. I am aging on some sort of oak, and I use a lot of like oak chips at this point, and it's just the easiest way I've been throwing things in. And I haven't done like a million different kinds of woods. I stick to like a few, like French oak and American and Hungarian, stuff like that. But it's a really fun thing, and I love using oak as a rounding profile for mead, especially when you're getting that high acid, high sweetness level. We talk about tannin as like one of those big terms that I'm sure you've heard a million times too. But that the tannins being there in a wine or mead coming from your oak or coming from the profile of the brew itself. And so that oak really does help to balance that whole profile, the whole brew itself. But it's fun. I love messing around with oak. I wish I could do more like barrels. That'd be like a dream of mine. Just have a big old barrel back here. It was something in it, but it's not going to happen now. It's going to have to happen in a bigger space. So.
Yeah, fair. Two things on that front, dude.
Yeah.
We have the maturation sticks, which are so. I've played around with a lot of the different oak stuff. The bourbon the chips thing is cool. I find it really hard to get that dialed in, especially over a long period of time because it's just so much surface area. And also sometimes, depending on where you're getting the chips from, like I question why those barrels ended up as chips.
Yeah.
So we've got some maturation sticks. I'll get your address afterwards.
Yeah.
And send you out a pack. But it's oak that was aged. It was yard aged / seasoned for 4 years. In Kentucky, going to be turned into bourbon barrels. It's like the best oak you can get, basically. And we snagged it and cut it up for people to mess around with.
That's awesome.
Before it could turn into bourbon barrels.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is it hasn't been toasted or charred. So you can treat it as you want. So if you want it to be a vanilla bomb, you can toast it at the right temperature for that. Or if you want it to be really oaky or nutty or,
That's super cool.
You can mess around with oak treatment.
Yeah.
So I'll send you a pack of those.
Oh, man.
The other thing that might be pretty cool for you is, have you seen the Bad Motivator barrels?
I haven't. Bad Motivator.
Okay, so going way back to that discussion we had at the beginning, one of the mentors I had at the beginning on the forums was this dude that called himself Bad Motivator, and his icon was this little R2 droid. And this little R2 droid helped me out a shitload when I was first starting. And he came up with this idea. So with distilling for home distillers, the big problem is how do you maturate for long periods of time? Because a 200-liter barrel, like the standard bourbon, so you have a 200-liter barrel with a certain amount of surface area, and that ratio of liquid to surface area just kind of works out really well. So you can actually age the spirit and kind of teabag it in oak.
Yeah.
If you shrink that down to like a 5-liter or a 10-liter barrel, the surface area to volume skyrockets. So you put a product into there and you can only put it in there for like maybe a year, maybe a year and a half. The smaller the barrel gets, the shorter your time span is. So you're getting more oak flavor, but not nearly as much just actual aging where oxidization and esterification and all that happens.
Interesting.
So this guy, Ben, super simple now thinking about it, but he took a stainless steel Bain Marie pot and just made a wooden head to go into the front of it. So it's a stainless steel container with a wooden head, and the surface area to volume ratio works out almost exactly the same as a 200-liter barrel.
Interesting.
But the advantage is that you actually have wood as a barrier between the liquid and the atmosphere. So you're getting micro-oxidization through wood, which you don't get if you're just throwing wood into like a glass jar.
Whoa.
For example.
What were these called again?
Tragically, Ben actually died a couple of months ago, which
That's
is
terrible.
pretty crazy. Died on a paragliding accident.
Oh.
So that's a whole other story. Thankfully, he had just hired someone to help with Bad Mo barrels before he died, and now Christopher's continuing to do it. So anyway, the reason I mention it is that it's the same ratio as a big barrel, but it's a small, it's like 6 liters. So I guess that's what, 2 and a bit gallons? So you could, the prospect of filling a 2-gallon barrel is not so scary for you, right?
Right.
But the aging process, you could age it in there for years if you wanted to. I don't know how it works with Mead. But it could be something kind of cool to look into.
Yeah. I love, so I had for my 50,000 subscriber thing a while back, I bought a 1.2 gallon barrel, something like that. It was tiny. It was like this little thing. And I put a Mead that had like is like a super traditional mead, had 8 different honeys in it. And then I just put it in there, and I was like, I'm not going to open this thing until I get to 50,000 subscribers. And I got there, and then I bottled it, and I gave the barrel away. But like you said, the smaller the area, the more oak you're going to get in a quicker profile. And I mean, it was like 9 months in that barrel. And it's a pretty oaky mead by the time I had taken it out of there.
Yeah.
It probably should have been out after like 2 or 3 months, honestly. And my experience with oak has been, I feel like other than that barrel stuff, I've done a lot with chips and things. And it's never like the red wine strength oaking that you get, where you get, or a wine in general, where it's like, for lack of a better term, just like ingrained in the brew. You're getting more of like a subtle, like a wafting.
Kind of like a layer on top.
Yeah. For like mead, I feel like I most of the time just get like a little wafting of a barrel or oak side, but never like a full, I'm chewing on the barrel, which is not necessarily what I want, but sometimes I do want a little more profile when it comes to chips or cubes or stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. I can't help you much, because it's, the interesting thing is, like, water and alcohol are both solvents. And when you stick water and alcohol into a barrel, it's that ratio between the two that seriously changes the profile you're going to get. And I don't know, I don't pretend to understand, down in the like 10 to 20% range. I don't know what happens. But for spirits, even the difference between like 55% and 60% will change the flavors you pull out of the barrel significantly. So let me have a think about it, dude. There might be an easier way that we can collaborate on this, in terms of maybe I could get a barrel to you that you could fill with mead for like 6 months, and then empty it out and send me the barrel. And then I can have a second use. I don't know.
There's whatever we do, I'm just excited to collaborate. This is going to be so much fun. I've like, I don't know.
I'd be keen to do something with you, dude. Like, whatever the logistics allow, let's tee something up.
I'll make it work. We'll make this happen, dude. I am so excited. Well, so I know that our time zones are different, and right now you're probably about lunchtime, if my math is correct, or something.
1:45.
Oh, okay. So here's what I want to do. First of all, we're going to talk here in a second, because I would love to talk a little more about our collaboration, because I want to do something for sure. Well, maybe we'll have to workshop it some over time, but people can look forward to that. It might be a little bit, just in how YouTube works and things.
These things take time. Yeah.
Good things take time. It takes time. But people who are watching my stuff have probably seen your content, but if you have not seen the Still It YouTube channel and all of his fun brews, he basically takes, literally anyone listening, he takes all the fun things that I think I do, and he does it 10 times better with higher quality and more fun, because I love watching your content. And so I'm going to make sure, and I'll put it down in the description of all these things, of this video and all those that. But is there anything we can look forward to coming out on your channel in the next little bit?
Ooh. There's always stuff in the works. I'm just trying to think what's actually, like, because like you said, right?
You've been sitting on stuff for a while. Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, the process of, like, you have an idea and you want to do it through to the videos out.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be so freaking long that it's not even worth mentioning.
Yep.
Like literally a year sometimes. We picked the wrong thing, right, dude? We should have done cooking channels.
Yeah.
We could have had a video wrapped up in
reaction videos. Man, just do that. You don't even have to do a lot of work. Just respond to react to people. The stuff like that. That's where it's all at.
Yeah, totally. I need to do I run a series of videos called the safety net videos. And they're directed specifically at people that kind of want to distill, but they're scared of all grain brewing. And the idea is that it forces them to do an all grain mash, but they can completely screw the mash up, get zero fermentable sugar out of the mash, and it'll still work and it'll still taste delicious. And the whole idea is it's just do it, please. If you're on the fence, you'll realize it's no big deal and you'll transition into all grain overnight.
Yeah.
So that's the Safety Net series.
Cool.
And I really need to do another one of those very soon. I'm still working on a seaweed gin. I'm trying to get a seaweed gin like dialed in to just the right point, and I haven't quite decided which route that's going to take yet.
Yeah.
It got real weird there for a little while with some New Zealand seaweed that ended up, I don't know how many people have visited a seal colony, but it literally smelt like a seal colony. It was terrible.
I can't say I have, but I'll trust you.
Yeah. Imagine an aquatic mammal's jockstrap. There's like it smelled like sweaty seal nuts. That was terrible.
You know, I always look for good.
But we have that dialed in now. It's better.
I always look for good titles of my podcast. Maybe that'll be it.
Yeah, go for it, man.
People will be like, "What is he talking about?"
What else have I got in the works? So Ben, the guy that set up Badmo, who passed away recently, he helped a lot of people. Like, he was just one of those guys that. So he had this barrel. It's like the most popular thing that we sell in our shop by far. There's 16 of them on the way here from America now. They sell for like $300 New Zealand each, and they'll sell out in a day. They'll be gone.
That's awesome.
Every freaking time.
That's cool.
Super, like, this guy could have been making a lot more money out of it. Instead, he was like, Jesse, come and hang out with me in Oregon, and I will show everyone exactly how I make these barrels so they can make them at home. Like, he was just that kind of guy.
That's so cool.
And with all of his distilling knowledge, he shared it like that. So he's sorely missed. And what we would like to do is set up I don't quite know what to call it, like a memorial kind of project. He was really into distilling Pinnacle sugar and treating it like rum and then putting it in the barrels and aging it. So I think the idea is we're going to explain to people exactly what he was doing with Pinnacle. And then Ben's favorite thing in the world was introducing a concept and then letting people run with it and turn it into all sorts of crazy, weird, different things. So we'll introduce the idea of Pinnacle as rum and then let people mess with it and change it. So that's probably the real big project I'm working on at the moment, just trying to figure out. I know what I want it to do. I don't know how it's going to do it yet. In terms of, it's coming from the opposite direction. It's not about the recipe. It's about the community interaction.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty important one for us coming up soon. What else, man? I don't know. I have probably like 40 things on a list that I'm quote unquote going to do. I just never know which one's going to surface next.
Yeah. Well, I get that too. I have a laundry list of things I have currently going, and then also, what I want to do as well. So I understand that. But I'm going to be pushing your channel, of course, and everyone should go check it out. And I hope that people will go check it out, not just for the fun content, but also to try distilling. And I know that a lot of people listening might be in the States, and it might be a little more sketchy for you to do it. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to be like me. You're not going to be publishing a YouTube video about the things you do. So just run forth with that sometimes, and don't be afraid to try it. And obviously, I think Jesse has proved that he has lots of great content to get you going. And especially with that video series you're talking about, just trying it and seeing what you can do from there. So,
I mean, the other thing is too, there's a huge portion of the people that watch the channel have never and will never distill anything. Some of them are just interested in the process. A lot of them are bourbon lovers, gin lovers, single malt lovers, and understanding how the products are made lets them enjoy the product more. Yeah. So a lot of people watch the channel from that point of view as well, and all power to them. I mean, I watch cooking videos all the time, and I almost never make the recipe.
But you know how to, and that's what matters. The day you choose to, you'll be ready. You'll be ready to do it. Man. Hey, well, it's been super great to chat with you. And again, I'll be pushing all of these things in the description of these videos and the podcast if you want to go check out Jesse. But thanks for spending your time talking and being kind enough to explain things to me, because I know I probably asked some silly questions, but it was a lot of fun to hear about it.
No, not at all.
So
no, it was awesome fun, man. This is like the best part of the job for me, is that I get to just hang out with cool people, and somehow this is work. I don't know how.
Yeah.
So it was just like having a fun talk with someone for an hour and a half. Almost 2 hours. There we go. We did good.
Yeah, we did great. Man.
Yeah, it's the best part of the job, man.
I agree. I love getting to do this. This is fun. So all right, I will look forward to collaboration between us. We're gonna talk about this now, and we're gonna do it off camera because we got to shoot some ideas back and forth. But thanks for being here, Jesse, and I hope that everybody enjoyed, because I definitely enjoyed. So cheers.
Yeah,
man.
me too, man. That was awesome. Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll talk to you later.